Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
Great to see you all. As I said last week, we are in a series moving through the Sermon on the Mount. And this is the second little section of Jesus' teachings. Last week we encountered these Beatitudes that sort of turn the world on its head a little bit. And Jesus now tells the disciples, tells the church that they are salt and light. One thing that didn't make it into the sermon that I thought was really interesting, and I wasn't even doing research, I just stumbled upon this week, is that at the time this was written in the ancient world, salt was a really important commodity. It was sort of like the way we would think about gasoline. Like when salt prices went up, everyone was in a panic. Now what does salt cost? No one even knows. It's a few pennies. Roman soldiers would get paid often in salt for their services, and it had to do with salt being able, mainly salt being able to preserve food. And so once refrigeration and those sorts of things came into play, salt became less and less important. But that's another thing to consider as Jesus says we're the salt of the earth. We're this valuable commodity. So I invite you to listen for God's word speaking to you. So Jesus said, "You are the salt of the earth, but if salt has lost its taste, how can its saltiness be restored? It is no longer good for anything, but is thrown out and trampled underfoot. You are the light of the world. A city built on a hill cannot be hid. People do not light a lamp and put it under a bushel basket. Rather, they put it on a lampstand, and it gives light to all in the house. In the same way, let your light shine before others, so that they may see your good works and give glory to your Father in heaven. Do not think that I have come to abolish the law or the prophets. I have not come to abolish, but to fulfill. For truly I tell you, until heaven and earth pass away, not one letter, not one stroke of a letter will pass from the law until all is accomplished. Therefore, whoever breaks one of the least of these commandments and teaches others to do the same will be called least in the kingdom of heaven. But whoever does them and teaches them will be called great in the kingdom of heaven. For I tell you, unless your righteousness exceeds that of the scribes and Pharisees, you will never enter the kingdom of heaven." Friends, this is the word of God for the people of God. Thanks be to God. So 2 times in the last few months, I've been tricked into buying these big bags of unsalted pistachios in the shelf. Why do they sell unsalted pistachios in the shelf? So I wasn't exactly tricked. The package said unsalted, and the second time, I guess, really wasn't my fault. But the unsalted was kind of in little tiny letters, and it was the same color as the rest of the bag. And I think if you're selling unsalted pistachios, the unsalted should be huge, the biggest thing on there, in red, 24-point font. So like most nuts, the difference between salted and unsalted is night and day. So I had the first bag sitting there for a while, and I'm like, how am I going to fix this? So I went online and found a recipe to fix them. So you put them in brine, and then you roasted them in the oven. And even though I suspected that 350 was too hot, I followed the recipe and I just burned them and threw them away. But the second bag, I was able to save. So if you need to know how, one thing is don't go over 200. It's long and slow, not hot and fast. So a long time ago, before Deb and I were married, we were making a pumpkin pie for Thanksgiving, and we were out of salt. And I remember saying to Deb, pumpkin pie is sweet, not savory. I don't really think it needs salt. And it didn't matter how much whipped cream or ice cream we piled on top of that pie. It was garbage. It tasted like nothing. So with sweet or savory baked goods, you need some salt to make the flavors come to life. Most of the time. There are exceptions to this. And if you're competing in the Great Presbyterian Bake Off, and you're a really, really good baker, I would encourage you to try and do it without salt. So I'm sort of thinking Amber, Max, Jeannie, this time around, any other competitors, if you're really good, you can get away without salt. Okay, one more salt and food thing. So this Christmas we received these sort of melt-in-your-mouth chocolate truffles. They're the kind that are like, dusted in cocoa. And the chocolate was delicious, but the secret of these is they had these little bits of salt in them. And so when those would melt into your taste buds, it was just like this explosion that lit up your mouth. They're just delicious. So salt on its own does not taste too great, right? So take a teaspoon of salt and put it in your mouth, right? That is terrible. But the right amount of salt brings all the food it touches to life. And Jesus said, you are the salt of the earth. So the other day, I parked on Overhill out here, and when I was leaving church at night, it was, getting late, I came through the sanctuary to get to my car. And you can't believe how dark it is in here sometimes at night. Like, it's so dark that if you don't use the little flashlight on your phone, you will just run right into a pew and not even see it. So it's that dark in here. You can't see a thing. But look at it now with some light. And we don't even have the sunshine glowing in. I was hoping we'd have the sunshine coming in. But even now, look at the difference light makes to this place. We would see nothing at all, and we see kind of all this glory around us, it coming alive. So light is a lot like salt in that way, that light on its own isn't much to look at. You wouldn't want to stare straight into the sun, but it brings everything it touches to a kind of new level of beauty. And again, Jesus said, you are like that. You are the light of the world. And this is no small thing, to be called the light of the world. So in the Gospel of John, which was written maybe 15 or 20 years after Matthew, Jesus says only of himself, I am the light of the world. He says it 2 times. And from the opening of John's Gospel, it's clear that when he says that, he's talking about the divine light. He's saying, I am a bearer of the divine light. So Matthew certainly saw this divine light in Jesus, and stories like the story of the Transfiguration, where Jesus, glows in a blinding light, demonstrate that. But Matthew here also sees that this same divine light was in the disciples. The regular, ordinary, fragile, frightened, confused followers of Jesus. They were also the light of the world. And we, as weak as we sometimes are also bearers of that same light. And to make this clear, later in the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus will turn to everyone he's preaching to and say to them, therefore be perfect as the Father in heaven is perfect. So not only are we salt and light, we are called to the perfection of God. I suspect that's a sort of higher view of humanity than most of us learned in Sunday school, right? I think most of us learned, you're a horrible sinner and you need Jesus to save you. But here, you're salt and light and even the perfection of God. And that's a lot to live up to. It's actually easier if we just admitted, I'm weak, I'm a sinner, and I need to sit back and have Jesus come and save me. But if you're up for taking action, and remember last week I said that the Sermon on the Mount is all about our actions, not about our beliefs, but our actions. So if you're up for taking action, and notice what Jesus says about being the light of the world, he says, let your light shine before others so that when they see your good works, they glorify God. Good works, what is that? That is action. So if you're up for taking action to become salt and light, let's just be honest about what we're up against in this world. So this January already in the United States, 63 people have been killed in mass shootings. And it may be higher than that because there was a shooting another yesterday morning. So 7 people were killed in Half Moon Bay, 11 were killed in Monterey Park, and yesterday morning 3 people were killed in Los Angeles. That's all just in California. And you may have seen this from earlier in January. A 6-year-old in Virginia brought a gun to school and, according to the police, intentionally shot his teacher, a 6-year-old. Russia's senseless war on Ukraine has been going on for nearly a year now. And I read the most hopeless and depressing column about this conflict this week. It was in the New York Times. It was titled, "The Afghans I Trained Are Fighting for Putin in Ukraine." And the story is exactly like it sounds. It was written by an American Green Beret who, when he was in Afghanistan, helped train Afghan soldiers to fight the Taliban. But since the withdrawal from Afghanistan has left many of these soldiers behind, who are now targeted by the Taliban, facing retribution and economic hardship, they are being recruited by Russia, by Putin, to fight in Ukraine because they're highly trained soldiers. So they're being hired as mercenaries. So soldiers that the U.S. trained and were our allies are now in Ukraine killing Ukrainians. And then in another story, just to see how twisted this is, we're now sending tanks to Ukraine, which will be used against our former allies. And it just shows you how, trying to cure violence with violence, once you let that out of the box, there's no way you can control it. And of course, we're all aware this weekend of the horrible police killing in Memphis, where 5 police officers have been charged with the murder in the brutal beating of Tyree Nichols, who's only 29 years old, a 29-year-old black man. So after Michael Brown, after Eric Garner, after George Floyd, after so many others, after all the outcry and the vigils and the protests, we as a nation can't manage to wake up about policing. We can't wake up about how to achieve real public safety. So I see I'm depressing you. I'm going to stop there. I mean, it goes on and on. You can go on and on with this stuff. So that's the world. That's the earth. So how are we supposed to be salt to this earth? How are we supposed to be light to this world? And the first thing I would say about this is that the Sermon on the Mount is a sort of how-to sermon. So Jesus says, you are salt and you're light, and the sermon that follows gives us instructions on how to do and be that. And that's why the second part of that passage, he's talking about the law. And essentially when he's talking about the law, he's talking about love your neighbor as you love yourself. But the teachings that follow tell us how to be salt and light. And they sort of make a case that in spite of how the rest of the world lives, we are different. We can walk in the kingdom of light today. In spite of the violence of the world, we can do that. And incidentally, much of the teaching that follows is about violence. It's about how do you live in a world where you need to turn the other cheek because you're struck on one. So a lot of it is about how to deal with violence. So the teachings say we can be a part of something better and purer and more holy and just and kind than this world is today. We can be a part of a community that sees and proclaims that violence does not bring true and lasting peace, that anger and revenge never fix broken relationships, that violence is not the road to public safety. So I would say take heart, because we get to be a part of this church. Not everybody in this country has this. We get to be a part of this church. We get to be a part of this family here, helping us to live in a better way. We get to follow Jesus. And after all, it's Jesus who said, "My kingdom is not of this world." So take heart, your kingdom is not of this world. It is of this place, this church, this discipleship, this following of Jesus. But that does not mean we are off the hook in trying to save the world, no matter how violent and broken it is, in the same way that Jesus tried to save his world. So again, given the mess of things, how do we continue to be salt and light? So the first practice I would offer is this, and it's really just straight up willpower, okay? It's straight up willpower. You might say it's fake it till you make it, salt and light, okay? So you just plain will yourself to be salt and light in a couple situations every day. So for instance, say you forgot to pick up a few things after a trip to the grocery store, and you're back in the grocery store parking lot and you're resentful that you have to be there. If you're not careful, that resentment will be directed toward, the people you're on the road with, the people you're in the parking lot with the fellow shoppers, and even the store employees who, after all, are just there to help you. So before you unbuckle your seatbelt, stop. Stop and ask yourself, how am I going to add something good to this situation? How am I going to walk into that store and be a little salt to how bland it is? How am I going to bring a little light? How am I going to brighten up someone's day? And it may be just as simple as looking the person who checks you out in the eye and saying, "Thank you so much for being here. Thank you for doing this." So this is a little bit like following the law, all right? You may not want to do it. You may not really know how to do it exactly. It doesn't come naturally to you, but you can still just follow the law. I'm going to be salt and light. And this is kind of how Jesus and St. Paul talk about the law. They say the law was there until you could get it right. But now that you're filled with Christ, now that you're filled with Christ's light, now that you're filled with Christ's love, you don't really need the law anymore. You just operate as light and love. So the first practice is, like I said, just by sheer willpower, go out there and try and be salt and light. But I think a better course is to become a person for whom being salt and light comes easily. And that takes a different sort of practice. It takes a practice that prepares you for the storm of life before you find yourself in the middle of the storm of life, right? I think that's what most of us would like to do. So I think part of being a part of a congregation like this, that's part of what we're doing here. We're preparing in here so that when we go out there, we are more able to be peace, joy, light, and salt. So I think what this is, it's a practice of regularly trying to see and to cultivate and to enjoy the light that Jesus says is within us all. And part of this, and I know I've said this before, and I'll keep saying it again, part of this is seeing that you are not exclusively light. You're not only light. So there's also a shadow side in you and in me that needs to be recognized and taken care of. So yes, you are the light of the world, but we know this, you also have anger and hatred and resentment in you. We all do. So just think about all of the violence that I mentioned a few moments ago. That is all done by people who have been taken in by the anger and hatred and resentment that is already in them. It's not necessarily that they're evil people they're just not enlightened. They're not aware that anger and resentment and hostility isn't the only thing they can be. And so they get taken along for a ride. So it's our job as disciples of Jesus to become enlightened, to become aware of what's going on within us, in our living room, so to speak. To be prepared when anger walks into that space and says something like, you have every right to shout and scream and take revenge on people. And to say, yeah, that voice is there, but that's not all of who I am. So part of being enlightened is becoming more and more aware of the light within you and the shadow within you. And when you are aware of that, you can choose light. So when you are aware, you can meet whatever really arises outside of you and within you with this mantra that comes to you from Jesus.